part of the way we talk about racism is broken is because we think of racism as this unacceptable, evil thing that I couldn't possibly have within myself. I look at racism as one of these social demons. And in its worst, it's violent and it's a systemic commitment to oppression. At its lightest and most harmless, it is these things that are being called microaggressions.
Well, I would define microaggressions as the small, almost mindless acts of racism that you aren't quite sure, they aren't overt, so you aren't quite sure that you're actually the victim of racism. It almost makes you question your sanity a little bit.
I would define microaggressions in a better way as a subconscious racial bias.
I'd say that for how I view microaggression, I think is maybe like a verbally, not always verbally, but a verbally like communicated assumption about someone that's of a different group, and whether that's race, gender, whatever, where you make an assumption about someone, and maybe that assumption is not a positive one.
It's the small ways that an underlying attitude kind of bubble to the surface, and it's not even necessarily conscious, but yeah, ways that subconscious attitude plays out, and that can be, small actions, word choice.
Oh man.
My experience of microaggressions has been minimal. Pointed at me, almost never. There's, people getting pissy for whatever reason, but the kind of everyday in and out of what I understand microaggressions to be hasn't been directed at me on account of me being, as you so articulately put, microaggression. The straight, white, cisgendered dude. I'm the majority. People look at me and see normal.
Because as an immigrant, my family and I didn't fit the looks of what a Latino immigrant family looks like. I mean, to this day, when I go to a restaurant with my mom, automatically they address her in English.
You're always aware that you are an African American in America, right? There's never, unless you are very, very comfortable, there's never ever this time when you're not aware of how other you are in this country.
I definitely experienced sometimes like working in an office with a lot of men and, being told, oh, you're not a cook, you bake, you only bring in cupcakes, you don't know how to grill chicken. And it was like, no, I've only shown you that I've only brought in cupcakes. I can grill chicken just fine.
Getting followed in the stores, that's really common. that's very common.
Hanging out with you, I remember getting tailed in the mall for the first time that I was aware of, and thinking it was hilarious and trying to mess with the tail a little bit, and pointing it out to you, and you said, oh yeah, that happens to me all the time. What? Why? That doesn't make sense.
During my conversation with a retail merchant at a retail department store a few weeks back, I noticed that when I was going through the aisles, they seemed to always keep their eye on me, and keeping in mind that I was one of the only minorities in the retail store at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I had another come up and ask, may I help you with something? And I was just saying, no, I'm all right, just browsing through, seeing what I like. And so the entire body language that the retail salesperson gave me when they were interacting with me seemed rather, they were uncomfortable or nervous.
You'll have a salesperson come up and ask you, may I help you? And they're not helping anyone else. Or they will come up and say, well, hey, are you sure that you're in the right store? Because all the stuff here is pretty expensive. Without
You had
knowing,
somebody say that to you? That's pretty bold.
yeah, at various car dealerships, it still happens.
Yes.
Around like certain ethnic groups, I will, say hi. If we're like the only ones walking past each other, then I'll say hi, provide a brief smile, just to disarm that assumption.
Hey, that's a guy, or hey, that's a black guy. The assumption that guy means white, and you have to add the modifier of black. Just little, like, I hadn't thought about that because my norm was white. But, stuff like that can be born out of either an underlying attitude, in my case, of, well, white is normal, and of course I don't need to add a modifier.
My biggest thing is people being like, what? You're Cuban,
Yeah.
but you look so white.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, your
Yeah.
skin, your hair, your eyes.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, do you speak Spanish? Or it's like, you don't like spicy food, but I thought you were Cuban.
Yeah.
And just assuming that all, Latino food is spicy. Or just like, oh, Cuban, Mexican, like, what's the difference? That kind of stuff a little bit.
Even out and about, I have gotten that you speak well. I did get that. I didn't say for a black guy, but it was implied.
Here's the other thing too, that because we're in the minority, a lot of times we get looked upon to answer for the entire African American race. It's like, I don't know everybody. I don't know what they think, what they how they feel about something. Guess what? We are as diverse as America is. There are African American Republicans, African American Democrats, African American Christians, African American Muslims. I don't speak for everyone. And to look at me, or to look at someone who is a minority in a majority social setting or corporate setting or whatever, and expect them to somehow know the collective mindset of their people group it's crazy.
This is more just like a funny story, but like I was going to make Mexican street corn for 4th of July, and I was telling a woman about it, and she was like, oh, now is this a family recipe? And it's like, no, Mexican street corn, I'm not Mexican, and this was taken from Chrissy Teigen's recipe, and she's Thai-Irish. So there you go, there's globalization for you.
I would say this too, the other thing that I tend, and I'm just going to say this to anybody that's listening out there that is not an African American, stay out my hair. Like, leave me alone about my hair. Yes, it gets big. Yes, I straighten it. Yes, I braid it. Yes, it gets curly. Whatever it does, it does. That is, just stay out my hair. Please. No, you can't touch it.
So I don't feel that I've ever been like finger pointed at, oh, you're one of those immigrants. That was not my experience. However, I have become so sensitive to recognizing it when it's addressed at other of my Latin American peers. And I really feel offended because just because I don't look Latina doesn't mean that, my heritage is powerful and it makes me who I am. And the same thing can be said of, somebody who has a Mexican heritage or a Puerto Rican or, South American or Central American. We all have a very deep love of country. And even though the United States, this is my country, English is my main language, there's a chunk of my heart that is purely Cuban, and being able to embrace that and recognize it as a middle-aged woman, it defines who I am.
We were recently, well, I wouldn't say recently, maybe a couple of years ago, Jay was involved in a situation downtown in our hometown. And, there's not a lot of African Americans that live out here. And he and a few friends were pulled over for skateboarding downtown, which apparently is illegal. All of the friends were allowed to go home with one of the parents, with the exception of Jay. Jay happened to only be the only African American there. He he was left outside behind a bank where they had pulled these guys over. And we went and picked him up, and then we went to the police station. And the police officer came out to speak to us about the incident. And everyone was upset. He was upset, we were upset. And she posed the question, why is he upset? He should be used to this. And we're like, what? Why should he be used to being pulled over by the police? And why would your assumption be that this is a young man who's well acquainted with being pulled over by the police?
That's part of what's so insidious about it is I don't know entirely, and a lot of people ask that question. A lot of people in my shoes and my category may not realize it. They may just see, hey, here's what all the media I consume tells me is a threat. Let me shy away from that or cross the street so I don't have to walk right past this person or, what have you, and not even have that enter their conscious mind. So when they say, hey, why did you, grab someone's arm or lock your door really quick or whatever, they say, well, I felt nervous, and not even be able to articulate it because, well, there was a black dude walking down the street. That's part of why it's difficult culturally to address it. That being said, I do find myself locking my doors a lot faster in Ipsy than I do in Ann Arbor.
I guess really any commentary as soon as what's your name? Oh, that's a different name. Where is that from? What does it mean? Where are you from? Oh, I hear an accent. That it's come to bother me a little bit recently because the first thing that somebody's going to notice about me is my accent. And ask me something more substantial about my person and not, it's like if I hear an accent, it's like, oh, you have a nice accent. But then I don't follow it up with like, where are you from? And why did you come? And is your family here? And why did you leave? It's like, that's a little personal and intimate.
This is the problem with microaggression, is that you just don't know. And I think this is what other people don't get. Part of the problem of being black in America is that you are always questioning, is this because the person is just rude or mean or nasty, or is it because I'm a black person in America and they see me as somehow subservient or less than or inferior to them?
Initially, there's that anger at, such, ignorance from what the media portrays African Americans as. When you look at, for example, the rhetoric that's used to describe black protesters versus, say, Caucasian protesters.
Mm-hmm.
The rhetoric that used on some groups would be troubled or mentally ill, but in regards to African Americans, when such the similar behavior is engaged in, it's always terrorists, criminals, thugs. And so I would say, based on just the portrayals and how people take that media or just some of that hearsay for gospel, I'm initially angry at such behavior and such ignorance, but also I'm hurt somewhere deep down.
I was pretty much amongst a lot of, Cuban immigrants who fled Cuba after Fidel Castro took over. Having said that, I think any aggression might have been like self-imposed, because what I did is I completely buried my Cuban heritage. I rejected it. I disowned it. I hated that I was Cuban. I refused to learn Cuban dances, anything that had to do with the Cuban culture, I squelched. I buried it. I wanted to be Linda or Susie or whatever popular girl names were in the 60s. That's who I wanted to be.
If you believe that your worldview is correct, then you should seek out people who have other worldviews Because if your worldview is in fact correct, the only thing that learning everything there is to know about other worldviews, other ways of thinking, and why other people got to that point, the only thing that'll do is strengthen yours. So why wouldn't you? A weak worldview is one that you have to surround with a bubble, and that can't stand up under the weight of trying to understand how someone else thinks.
I would say the next step would be to cultivate a mindfulness about interacting with people and how they might perceive your actions, your words, and when you're mastering any new habit, you don't know what you don't know, right? Initially, and you go through this series of having to be very conscious of behaving differently. So I think that's the first step, is understanding where you might be a perpetrator of some microaggressions against different minority groups.
First of all, that's an excellent learning experience, and I think when you start to have conversations with people of different opportunities and upbringing, that's really an opportunity to gain insight and to gain knowledge. And so the first time having conversations about feminism or about the LGBTQ community or what different races and backgrounds have had to go through throughout history, there's a little bit of like a twinge in my stomach as far as like that uncertainty, and it's like I take that as an opportunity to learn. And if you're from a very sheltered background, and you've always referred to a group of people a certain way because that's how grandma talked and described them or whatever growing up, okay, but like understand that as you go out into this world, there's different stuff to be learned, there's opportunities. And so I think being able to take that and learn from that, and I guess just learn to communicate as a human being with other human beings.
Make friends who don't look, act, or think like you. Don't bubble yourself away. It's too easy to do. And don't make friends to be like, hey, I got a boyfriend. But be willing to have conversations where you ask someone's perspective, someone who doesn't look, act, or think like you. Ask their perspective of, hey, what is your experience of life? What is your experience of this or that issue, or this or that part of life that I've never thought about? And then shut up and listen. Don't try to minimize anything like, oh, well, cops are just doing their best. No, shut up and listen and try to understand someone's perspective so it isn't like you.
We're all one blood. We all came from the same source. So when I look at another human being, I'm seeing a brother or a sister, and I love to engage people, and I'm always like, tell me about you. I want to look at the individual. I don't want to look at where you are in life and prejudge why you are who you are. I like to give people like the benefit of the doubt. What circumstances brought you to where you are today? I'm interested in you.
I have a saying, I'm 90% wrong, I'm 10% right. 90% of the time I'm wrong, 10% of the time I'm right. So if I'm only right 10% of the time, I have a lot to learn. And the way that I'm going to learn that is to interact with other people and find out what I don't know. And once I begin to understand what I don't know and figure out, oh, this vast world that we live in has so many different aspects to it that if I take time to learn about a different culture, which we do not do often in the United States of America, learn about a different culture, learn to embrace it, learn to understand what the commonalities are between the different cultures, and then make that the foundation.
Go open those horizons, talk to someone that you haven't talked to before, and you'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised.